"Your Royal Highness, what was it like seeing the floods for yourself today?" At 6:18 p.m. on December 23rd, Buckingham Palace released a statement from King Charles that stopped the nation mid-preparation for Christmas. The medical review completed that afternoon had revealed results his physicians had hoped to avoid. What the king confirmed would fundamentally alter the final years of his reign in ways no one had anticipated. The statement that silenced Christmas Eve. The statement appeared not through the usual palace communication channels, but directly from the king's private office, a detail that immediately signaled its personal significance. Staff preparing for the royal family's traditional Christmas Eve departure to Sandringham paused as the notification reached their phones. Journalists, wrapping up before the holiday break, scrambled back to their desks. And across Britain, families in the midst of final Christmas preparations stopped what they were doing as news alerts flashed across their screens. Following a comprehensive medical review completed this afternoon, the king's statement began. "I must inform the nation that my condition, while being actively treated, has progressed in ways that require me to adjust both my treatment approach and my public duties going forward." The words hit with devastating clarity. Charles was not recovering as hoped. The cancer diagnosis he had shared publicly in February 2024, which he had assured the nation was being successfully managed, had taken a turn his physicians had worked quietly through the autumn to address. But the latest review conducted by his oncology team at a London hospital that afternoon had confirmed what Charles had privately begun to accept over recent weeks. The disease was not retreating. It was adapting, resisting, requiring interventions that would fundamentally change what the final years of his reign would look like. The statement continued with a level of medical candor that shattered decades of royal protocol around health privacy. "My physicians have recommended a more aggressive course of treatment, which I have chosen to pursue. This treatment will allow me to continue in my role as king, but will require modifications to my schedule and responsibilities, as side effects will at times limit my capacity." The British public, settling in for what should have been a peaceful Christmas Eve, absorbed the news with collective shock. Within minutes, the BBC had interrupted its regular programming. Sky News brought in medical experts and constitutional historians. And across social media, the mood shifted from holiday cheer to somber reflection on what the king's words actually meant. For those who understood the careful language of palace communications, the implications were clear. Charles was preparing the nation for a visible decline. He was acknowledging that his time as a fully functioning monarch was measured not in decades, but in years, and he was doing something unprecedented, managing his own succession while still alive, transparent about his mortality in a way British monarchs had never been. In the United States, where it was early afternoon, CABLE networks cut into their pre-Christmas coverage with breaking news banners. King Charles reveals cancer has progressed. British monarch announces adjusted prognosis. The American reaction was immediate sympathy, mixed with fascination at the constitutional implications. How would the monarchy manage a gradual transition? What did this mean for Prince William? And how long did Charles actually have? By PM, Buckingham Palace had issued a brief supplementary statement, confirming that the king would proceed with the royal family's Christmas plans at Sandringham, and that further details about his adjusted schedule would be released in the new year. But the questions that statement left unanswered were the ones that would dominate coverage through the holiday and beyond, the health crisis hidden in plain sight. To understand what forced Charles to release such a devastating statement on the eve of Christmas, it is necessary to return to February 2024, when he first publicly acknowledged his cancer diagnosis. The announcement at the time had been carefully calibrated, informing the public of the diagnosis, while assuring them that treatment had begun promptly and that the prognosis was positive. What the public had not been told, because palace, protocol, and Charles's own privacy preferences prevented, it was the specific type of cancer he was battling or the statistical realities of its typical progression. The palace had confirmed only that it was not prostate cancer discovered during a procedure for benign prostate enlargement, and that Charles had commenced a schedule of regular treatments. Through the spring and summer of 2024, Charles had continued working while undergoing treatment. His schedule reduced, but his visibility maintained. By autumn, the palace had indicated that treatment was proceeding successfully and that the king's prognosis remained encouraging. The public, relieved by these reassurances, had largely accepted that Charles was managing a serious but controllable condition. But behind the carefully managed public narrative, a different reality was emerging. Routine scans conducted in September and October 2025 had begun showing developments that concerned Charles's oncology team. The cancer had not spread to new sites, which was positive, but the original site was showing signs of resistance to the initial treatment protocol. The cells were adapting, finding ways to survive the interventions that had initially seemed effective. Dr. Michael Ashton, Charles's lead oncologist and a specialist in the specific type of cancer the king was fighting, had recommended additional scans and consultations with colleagues at leading cancer research centers. Through November, Charles had undergone a battery of tests, each one providing more detailed information about how his disease was behaving and what options remained available. The consultations had led to a series of private meetings at Clarence House, where Dr. Ashton and his team presented Charles with increasingly difficult information. The cancer was not responding to the current treatment as they had hoped. More aggressive intervention was possible, but it would come with significant side effects that would impact Charles's ability to maintain his current level of activity. The options presented were stark. Charles could continue his current treatment, knowing it was likely to become progressively less effective, buying time but accepting gradual decline. Or he could pursue a more aggressive protocol, combining immunotherapy with targeted radiation, which offered better odds of controlling the disease but would cause debilitating fatigue, potential cognitive effects during treatment cycles, and visible physical changes the public would inevitably notice. There was also a third option, though Dr. Ashton had presented it with obvious reluctance. Charles could choose to forego further aggressive treatment and focus on palliative care, maximizing quality of life for whatever time remained. This option would likely give him months rather than years, but those months would be relatively comfortable rather than spent battling treatment side effects. Charles had listened to all three options with his characteristic stoicism, asking detailed questions about timelines, success rates, and impact on his ability to fulfill royal duties. He had requested time to consult with his family before making a final decision. And Dr. Ashton had agreed with the understanding that delay itself carried risks. The first person Charles told was William. On December 10th, he had asked his son to join him for a private meeting at Clarence House. No staff, no formal agenda, just father and son discussing the reality neither wanted to confront. Charles had explained the medical situation plainly, not hiding behind euphemism or false optimism. William had listened in silence, his face carefully controlled, but his hands gripping the arms of his chair with visible tension. When Charles finished, William's first question had been immediate and direct. How long? Charles had answered with the honesty his son deserved. With aggressive treatment, 2 to 4 years of functional capacity. Perhaps slightly longer, though the quality of that time would decline. Without aggressive treatment, significantly less. The conversation that followed had been one of the most difficult of their relationship. William, facing the reality that his father would die during his own lifetime, had struggled between grief and the institutional responsibility of preparing for kingship. Charles, watching his son process this future, had felt the weight of what he was asking William to carry. Not just the crown, but the burden of watching his father's gradual decline while preparing to replace him. By the end of that meeting, they had reached an understanding. Charles would pursue the aggressive treatment, maximizing the time available to ensure a stable transition. William would begin preparing more intensively for the responsibilities that would fall to him. First, gradually through the transitional regency protocol they had recently established, and eventually through full succession. What Charles had decided that day, and what would drive his December 203rd statement, was that this process should happen transparently. The British public deserved to understand what was coming, and Charles himself deserved the dignity of facing his mortality honestly, rather than maintaining a fiction of recovery that was becoming increasingly impossible to sustain. The conversations that preceded the announcement, the formal medical consultation that would lead to Charles's public statement, took place on December 15th in a private conference room at Clarence House. Present were Charles, Prince William, and if you want to understand why that idea freaks people out, you have to look at the one word royal commentators keep flirting with, but rarely explain clearly, regency, because online, regency gets treated like a dramatic coup. In real life, it's basically the constitutional backup plan for when a monarch can't perform royal functions. The core framework comes from the Regency Act 1937 as amended later, and it sets out a formal process for declaring incapacity and transferring the functions of the sovereign to a regent. Research Briefings +1 and Yes If that process were ever triggered. The next in line to serve as regent in an incapacity scenario would be Prince William. The Constitution Unit blog +1, but here's the key thing. Most videos skip because it's less movie trailer and more rulebook. A regency isn't just people feeling like the king is struggling. It requires a formal declaration under the law, supported by evidence and signed by specific constitutional office holders. It's not a vibe. It's a legal mechanism. Research Briefings +1. So if you see creators saying, this is basically a regency already, what they often mean is something softer and unofficial, a soft regency. That phrase gets used by constitutional experts to describe a situation where the king remains king. But the heir quietly starts doing more and more public-facing work without a formal incapacity declaration. The Constitution Unit has written directly about this idea in the context of Charles's cancer announcement, explaining how the legal framework exists and how duty sharing can happen without a formal regency being declared. The Constitution Unit blog, and once you understand that, you see why the handover narrative keeps coming back every time the palace uses careful language. Because people aren't just asking, how's the king? They're asking, are we drifting into a soft regency without anyone admitting it? But that still isn't the most interesting part. The most interesting part is that Britain has actually lived through something like this before, long before social media, long before 24/7 news, and long before a palace statement could hit every phone in the country in seconds. Back in 1811, after King George III was incapacitated, Parliament passed the Regency Act 1811, and the Prince of Wales became the Prince Regent. On February 5, 1811, that's real historical precedent for how the country handles a monarch who can't perform. Duties functions shift, the crown stays, and the heir effectively runs the show under the monarch's name. Wikipedia +2 Wikipedia +2 now, obviously. 1811 is in 2026, but it gives you the reason this story feels bigger than one. Medical update, the mechanism exists, and history proves it can be used. And that's why even a positive update, like Charles saying doctors may reduce treatment in 2026, doesn't shut down the conversation. Wikipedia +1, it actually reshapes it. Instead of, is it getting worse? People start arguing about something sneakier. Is the palace already planning the workload split? And when the public starts thinking that way, everything becomes a clue. A short engagement becomes, he couldn't manage longer. A long engagement becomes, they're proving he's fine. A strong-looking appearance becomes, they're staging confidence. A cancelled appearance becomes, here we go. That's the trap. And it's why this topic is perfect for a high-retention script, because the tension isn't invented. It's built into how modern monarchy communicates. So how do you keep viewers locked in without going full conspiracy? You give them something concrete to watch. Here are the 3 tells that matter way more than random. Rumor accounts. First, who handles what? If you notice William covering more of the routine representation, while Charles focuses on the most symbol-heavy moments, that's not necessarily a crisis. That's how a long-term workload adapts. And we've already seen how the palace manages postponements with careful updates when treatment has temporary side effects. Like March 2025, Research Briefings 2nd, how the palace phrases updates. Precautionary phase is reassuring language, but it also keeps flexibility. If treatment changes again, they haven't painted themselves into a corner. Wikipedia +1/3, whether counselors of state become a bigger part of the story. This is where people get messy online, because the list is public, but how it's used is strategic. Parliament and the Constitution Unit have both explained how Charles asked for more. Counselors of state, adding Anne and Edward to strengthen continuity exactly. The kind of institutional tweak that becomes proof for speculation channels. House of Commons Library Plus to the Constitution Unit blog +2. And now we get to the rumor zone. The part that gets views, but can also tank credibility if you present it wrong. You'll see posts claiming abdication is locked in, or that William is already running everything, or that a formal handover has a hidden deadline. Treat that as what it is, unverified chatter. Some outlets insist there's no abdication plan and frame the whole thing as speculation cycles. So if you cover it, the best retention move is to tease it, then ground it. There's been a lot of buzz online about abdication, but here's what we can actually confirm. Then you anchor to the solid timeline. Cancer diagnosis announced February 2024. Continued treatment, temporary side effects update March 2025, and the December 2025 message about reduced treatment in 2026, legislation.gov.uk +2, research briefings +2, that's the spine. Everything else is speculation layered on top. And if you want your viewers to stick to the end, you don't just promise a twist. You promise clarity. Because the truth is, the monarchy is likely heading into a phase where public life looks more team-based, whether anyone calls it that or not. That doesn't automatically mean a regency. It doesn't automatically mean abdication. It means an institution protecting continuity, while a real person deals with real treatment scheduling. So, if you want to know what happens next, watch for the quiet signals, not the screaming headlines. Watch the diary. Watch who travels. Watch who stands in at key moments. And watch the language, because in royal communication, the most revealing part is often what never gets said out loud. And if 2026 teaches us anything, it might be this. The crown doesn't always change hands with one shocking announcement. Sometimes it changes shape first, slowly, publicly, and so carefully that half the country doesn't notice until it's already happened. And so carefully that half the country doesn't notice until it's already happened. Now, here's where a lot of viral scripts go off the rails, and if you're building a channel long-term, this is the moment that separates views from credibility. Here, people swear that a late-night palace statement dropped on December 23rd saying the king's condition progressed and that everything is about to change. It sounds official because it's written like an official memo. But when you check for reputable confirmation, you run into a problem. The biggest outlets and the official palace channels don't show that kind of announcement on that date. What we can verify publicly is much more grounded. The official diagnosis announcement from February 5, 2024 exists on the royal family's site. And major reporting confirms moments like the March 27, 2025, hospital observation after treatment side effects, the royal family +1, and most recently, in mid-December 2025, there's reporting that Charles said doctors can reduce his treatment in 2026, with the palace describing a precautionary phase. People.com +2, ANADOLU, Ajansk +2. So if you're telling this story, the best retention move isn't to copy a dramatic, tragic statement that may not be real. It's to do something smarter. Expose why those scripts spread and why people fall for them, because that's the real plot twist. The modern monarchy doesn't just fight illness, it fights narratives, and the easiest narrative for the internet to sell is a countdown. It has all the ingredients: powerful title, limited details, huge stakes, and a built-in successor everybody recognizes. You can slap breaking on it, and people will click, even if they don't believe it, because curiosity wins. But the truth the palace is actually dealing with looks more like this: a king with an undisclosed cancer type, continuing treatment, managing side effects like anyone else. While trying to keep national life steady, the royal family +2 Reuters +2 and a royal system that's legally prepared for disruption, without needing to shout handover every time the schedule shifts. That's why the most important part of this story isn't a single statement, it's the pattern of how the palace communicates. Think about it. The palace has two jobs every time it updates the public. Job 1. Reassure the country that state business continues. Job 2. Avoid giving the internet a medical timeline to obsess over. So they use language that's calm, flexible, and annoyingly vague. That's not incompetence. That's strategy. And that strategy creates a weird effect. Even good news can sound like a warning, because it's written to leave room for change. Like the December 2025 update, Charles described reduced treatment as a blessing, and the palace framed the care plan as moving into a precautionary phase. That's hopeful. But it also confirms monitoring continues. People.com +2 ANADOLU, Ajansk +2 now. If you want viewers to stay to the end, you don't just repeat this is shocking 10 times, you guide them through the exact mental spiral the public goes through. then you bring them back to reality.